Today I have my top 5 tips for outdoor photography, and this is geared more towards fashion and portraiture. I really hope you guys enjoy the tips and learn something from this video, so let's get into it.
Tip number 1, experiment with different backdrops. When I'm photographing on location, one of my favourite things to do is try and find the most interesting backdrops as possible. And this might include looking for really grungy or even really dirty backdrops. I find that sometimes they can make the most interesting effects in photos. And it's really good to try and experiment and see what you can come up with. I think that's one of my most favourite parts about shooting on location, because you don't always get to do this with studio photography. Tip number 2, experiment with different lighting. There are so many ways to experiment with light when you're shooting outside. 3 main ways I like to light my photos when I'm shooting outdoors is by using shaded, even lighting, full sun, and also photographing backlit. There are many other ways and different combinations of lighting techniques that you can use outdoors, and a few of them might be dappled light, or even harsh shadows can be really interesting in photographs sometimes. So I'd really urge anyone who's just starting out, especially with outdoor photography, to really experiment and get to know your lighting techniques. Tip number 3, use a reflector for a more natural effect. Using a reflector is a great tool on sunny days especially, because it can help reflect the light back onto the model's face if it's quite bright, and also it will generally give a more natural effect. However, if you're not after a natural effect and you want more of a studio looking image or something used with artificial lighting, you can actually experiment with the reflector and move it closer to the model's face, and depending on how bright the day is, it can give more of a studio effect to the image. In this first image, no reflector was used, so you can see that it's a little bit dark on the model's face. In this image, the reflector was used a little bit closer to the model, so it's quite studio looking. And in this photo, the reflector was used a little bit further back. Tip number 4, experiment with your aperture. You'll notice that a lot of these tips have the word experiment in them, and this is no exception. So using your aperture for different photographs can really give you different effects. For example, if a background is a little bit distracting, you can always blur it out by using a wider aperture. Tip number 5, bring objects to create a sunlight filter. This is always a good tip if you're shooting on a really bright sunny day, and in my previous video I had this as one of the tips, and I think this is a really important one. If it is too sunny, it's always good to bring an object to help filter out the sun, whether it be a white sheet, or like in these clips, I've used a reflector to completely block it out. But it's always good to try and use a filter or something sheer that you can use to just soften the light a little bit more.